it's really, it marks a point where we really need to reevaluate what it is that is valuable and meaningful about the things that we do every day. I remember one time my father took me aside and he said, you know, everything you see around us, this house we have, everything you see in it, I earned that with my own two hands, working 9 to 5 every day. You know, I would get up in the morning, I would go in, and you know, it was my labor that brought you everything you see around you. He said, David, it was horrible. Don't do that. Find some way you don't have to get a real job, you know. So I took his words to heart, and you know, he said, becoming an academic or something, you know. And I realized that there's like huge classes of people. It's true of a lot of people in government, more and more as time goes on. You know, their real job is to make you kind of feel like you're inadequate, that you're undeserving, and I realize that, you know, that's what government does. All these neoliberal reforms, which are supposed to like put conditionalities on welfare and like make things more efficient, they're framed in this moralizing terms. But what they actually end up doing is, you know, creating these huge class of people to sort of monitor you and make you think you're just not doing a very good job in life. And these bureaucracies operate, you know, are creating all of these jobs where people are essentially, you know, telling you that value comes from paperwork rather than from anything anybody actually does. You know, it starts on the level where there's this guy sort of monitoring you to see if you're using all the rooms of your house correctly or taking care of your children correctly, or, you know, all this sort of benefit like fraud conditionality, you know, people trying to decide whether you're actually married to someone, or you know, so poor people are just constantly monitored by huge classes of people who are there just to make you feel bad about yourself and tell you you're not doing a good enough job in life. And then the middle class, there's audit culture, everything. You spend as much time, I mean, I know this from universities, you know, sort of assessing what it is you're doing than you spend actually doing it, like increasingly more time assessing it. And that's all with forms and paperwork, and value comes from paperwork. More and more. And I think finance is just the peak of it. It's the idea that, like, you know, a securitized derivative is just a really, really, really fancy form of paperwork, which is the ultimate source of value, right? So the people who have the most elaborate paperwork are the, you know, create the most value and are the richest and are the top of the pyramid. So what would be a, you know, a left-wing position that would like be anti-bureaucratic? I mean, we need to grab this because, and I think it's pretty obvious. It's just like, fire all those guys and, you know, and give everybody the same amount of money. That'll work. And it'll reduce the size of government dramatically, because all those annoying people do, like, you know, trying to make you feel bad about themselves, well, you know, they'll get basic income too, so they can go off and become poets or musicians or, you know, do something useful with their lives. They'll be happier too. I don't really want to be doing that. So that whole sort of mountain of paperwork will just kind of collapse. The thing that people in power fear the most is a population that, you know, has basic security and time. I mean, that started to happen in the late 60s. And look what happened. They freaked out. I mean, you can actually see this. There was, I've talked to people who were in different, like, sort of ruling class think tanks at the time, and they said there was a lot of discussion, like, what's going to happen when robots replace all the jobs? You know, we thought the hippies are bad. What happens when the entire proletariat turns into hippies? Oh my God, it's going to be a disaster. You know, Marx has always attributed ideas of communism, labor theory of value, from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. It turns out he didn't make up any of those himself, really. They were just seemed to be the kind of things that were bouncing around in cafes at the time and sort of worker circles. And you kind of picked up and certainly integrated it in a brilliant way. But the idea of the labor theory of value just became common sense in the 19th century. I mean, if you look at even sort of mainstream politicians, I was looking at speeches by Abraham Lincoln, you know, any of these people, they sound like Marxists now. You know, everybody's talking about how, you know, all capital is derived from labor and labor must be given precedence, so forth and so on. So they had this notion that value comes from human labor. The problem is they also had this focus on production. That, you know, the factory labor was seen as the sort of paradigm for all labor. It was very macho, you know, males, like guys smithing things and banging things and casting iron and so forth was production line perhaps, was the basic image. Whereas, of course, most labor is not actually productive if you think about it. Like, you make a glass once, right? But you wash it like 1,000 times. Most labor isn't about making things, it's about keeping things the same, maintaining things, nurturing things, giving them an environment in which they can grow, caregiving, caretaking. But then the question is, how do you validate work? Well, you just say you go back to the Puritan idea. Work is valuable in itself. If you're not like working really hard at something you don't like, well, you're not a very good person. You're a parasite. So that's how you can have the situation now where people actually think their work is more valuable if they don't get anything out of it. So even if you know that you're doing something good for the world, in a way you should be paid less. People think it's okay. Like nurses should be paid less, or because they're actually contributing, or teachers because they're contributing to the world. So I think that we need to massively reevaluate this. If we're going to take off again, we need to start thinking about what makes work actually valuable, which is that it's a form of care for other people. It benefits people in a concrete way, and nobody can really decide how that happens other than the people doing it. So I think if we're going to try to have that conceptual revolution, which can overcome this notion of job creators, and that everybody left and right, when they're always calling for more jobs and more work. I think because the only way they can see people as valuable is that they're doing something they don't like very much, whether or not there's any need for it. We've caught ourselves